Welcome to the video for 7th grade core math, section 2.5, coordinate graphing. This is in your textbook on page 30. So as you can see, I've modeled our layout. We always start out with our heading, name, date, broad subject, which is core math, and the topic, which for today is coordinate graphing. Now, this part will be in your book, but I've copied it down, as you will today, and the rest of it we're going to do together. So if you look on page 31, you'll see this entire coordinate plane. Remember that this side will be for bookwork, and this will be for notes and stars, and also vocabulary words. So to begin our launch discussion, you'll see that in the study of similar figures, you use positive number coordinates, which are here in X and Y, and arithmetic operations to locate and move points around a coordinate grid. And you can use negative number coordinates to make a grid that extends in all directions. So this area, the positive Y, this area is the positive X. Down here we have negative Y direction, and over here we have the negative X direction. Now, there are a few important vocabulary words, which I will show you over on this side. This line right here is the Y number line, or Y-axis. So I'm going to make a little note in my vocabulary section that says Y, please do this with me, Y number line, also called the Y-axis. Now, this area right here is called quadrant 1. So I'm going to label this quadrant 1. Now my quadrants go around this way, so some of my vocabulary I'll have to put over here. This is quadrant 2. Over here, I'm going to label it as quadrant 3. And this last one, you guessed it, is quadrant 4. Now, we already talked about the Y-axis, or Y number line. This is our X-axis, or X number line. I'm going to write X-axis right here. And a quadrant is an area that has an entire region bounded by the axes. So I could extend all the way in this direction, all the way off of our screen, and I would still be in quadrant 3. Similarly, everything way up here is quadrant 1. So, now that we know all the different pieces of our coordinate plane, and I'm going to label this as my coordinate plane, this whole thing, that's the coordinate plane. We can start problem 2.5. Now, I've labeled all the points just as you would see them. Let us continue on to the next page. Keep in mind that I'm going to use the same format as you will use in your spiral notebook today. So my first step is going to be to fold it in half. And still the same day as before, so I don't need to make a new heading. I'm going to assume that it's the same old thing. I'm going to start out by writing 2.5 and then A. Write the coordinates for each point that is labeled with a letter. So how many points are there? It all goes up through G. So I'm going to have answers for A, B, C, etc. Let me just get you started. I'll do 1 point from each quadrant. So if we look back, we can start with quadrant number 1. C is at, looking at my number line for the X-axis, looks like it starts at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's halfway between 6 and 8. Notice that not all of the places are labeled, but that's okay. So when I write my coordinates, I always have to start with the X position. So I know that it starts out at X equals 7, so I'm going to put a 7 there. Then I'm going to make a comma. Always after the comma comes the Y position. So I'm going to turn back, and I'm going to look how far up it is in the Y-axis. Now vertically, it's 2 away from the center in the y direction. So that means y is going to be positive 2. Every time I write coordinates, they have to be surrounded by parentheses. Otherwise, people won't know that they're coordinates. Let's try for a point that is in quadrant number 2. But before we do that, notice that in quadrant number 1, everything has positive x and y values. In quadrant 2, it'll be positive in the y direction, but negative in the x direction. In quadrant number 2, we see point A. So I'm going to write it up here. I'll start out with my x-coordinate. My x-coordinate is minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is going to be x equals negative 6. So I'll write a negative 6 here. Negative goes inside the parentheses. In the y direction, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, halfway between positive 6 and positive 8. So I'm going to write a 7 for the y position. That's in quadrant 2. Quadrant 2 always has negatives in the x direction. It's this way. You can think of it as being a little spiral. It starts here and goes 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way around. Let's try something now in quadrant 3. Notice that all the numbers over here are negative, so my x and y coordinates are both going to be negative. Now my next point, which is in quadrant 3, is point F. I'm going to skip D just like I skipped B. Point F, if I look, now remember I have to do x first, that's this way. Minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, minus 4. It's right there. If you need help, you can kind of use your pen or pencil or a ruler to tell you how far it is away. So that's negative 4. I'm going to go back here and write down for point F that x is negative 4, make my comma, and it's clearly at y equals negative 2. And there we go. We're done with point F. Now, that brings us all the way around to quadrant number 4. We have a couple points we can do. Let's try point D. If we look at D, we can see that it's past 8. It's kind of at x equals positive 9. So I'm going to write a 9 here. You know what? I didn't model good work. I put my bookwork over on this side. I need to leave that space clear for notes. So from now on, I'm going to remember that this is for my notes and that's for my bookwork. Okay, I think it'll be okay. B. Point D is at x equals 9. Y equals negative 7. So we'll mark that down here. And there we go. We have our answers for A, C, D, and F. 1 point for each quadrant. And we'll ignore that little mishap. Let's try question B. Question B says, what is the sign of the x value and the y value for any point in quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4? Now, I've already walked you through this, but I'll get you started. Quadrant 1. And I put my answer out next to it. It's positive in the x and positive in the y. Quadrant 2. Remember, we went around so that quadrant 2 was over here. That means it's negative in the x, but still positive in the y. And I think you can figure out 3 and 4 on your own. Let's go now to question C. It says the point opposite negative 5, positive 8 has coordinates positive 5, negative 8. Let's see what it's talking about when it means the point opposite. So positive 5, positive 8 is over here. Oh, sorry. It says negative 5, positive 8. So negative 5 over here, positive 8. That's up here. I'll put a little star here so we remember where we're talking about. Oh, that's a negative 6. Little star. This is negative 5, positive 8. We're talking about the point opposite. So they're saying, and they mean opposite, that it's positive 5 and negative 8. So that is going to be all the way down here. plus 5 minus 8. Alright, so it looks like positive means all the way over on the other side, as far as you can go, flipped over both axes. Both of the signs are going to change when it means opposite. So I'm going to write that down as a note. Opposite sides of the grid means far away. Both signs change. That'll help me remember it when I go back to study for a test. Now, we're told to notice that the sign of each coordinate in the pair changes, right? The coordinates for the points opposite the labeled points on a grid like the one shown. Graph and label each opposite point with a letter followed by a tick mark. Point A prime is opposite point A. So instead of doing C over here, I'm going to go back to this piece and I'll start making my opposites. And I'm going to label them. Let's make my note. Opposites are labeled A prime, B prime, etc. Where when I say prime, I mean I have a little tick mark. So, A looks like it's at -6, +7. So I'm going to go to 6, -7, and I'll draw my point and I'll label it A prime. Draw a little circle around it so I know that goes with question C. We can try that with something over here. I can find the opposite of point C. So C is at 7, +2. I need to go to -7, -2, because both signs change. I'll call that C prime. That is the opposite of C. If we go to something in this column, or in this quadrant rather, F, we need to make both signs change again. So if it's at -4, -2, I need to go to +4, +2. That is going to be F prime. And I think you can figure out the last quadrant on your own. Let's try question D now. In D, we need to draw line segments connecting each pair of related points, A and A prime, B and B prime, etc. And then we have to write what we notice about the line segments. So I'll start us out by drawing line segments. Now, one way of doing this, instead of needing a ruler, I can just fold my paper and use it as my own little ruler. So if I want to connect A and A prime, I'm going to start out like this. Here's my line segment. And then let's try connecting C with C prime. Again, I can try using my paper. Well, that doesn't always work. So let me just try and do that one freehand. Oh, that's a little too far up. You can use an index card too if you need it, or you can bring a ruler or use a book or extra piece of notebook paper. Here's my line segment. A little shorter than the one for A, but seems like it's passing through the middle. Let's test that out. We have F and F prime. And if we draw a line segment through those, it's even shorter, but I'm noticing one more thing. My goodness, they all pass through the middle of the coordinate plane, which is 0, 0. So I think this is going to help us answer question D. You need to continue drawing those line segments, but all of the segments pass through the point 0, 0 at the center of the grid. That's part of what it means for something to be opposite. Let's try question E now. We need to plot the points in each part on a grid and connect the points to form a triangle. Draw each triangle a different color but on the same grid. So, you're going to need markers. When you reach question E, raise your hand and I will give you a marker, and I'll need to come and get it at the end. So let's start out E1. Well, I'll write down E1. I need to do +1, -1, +2, +3, and -4, -2. I'll start out drawing that first triangle on my grid just as before. So +1 is right up here. It's getting a little crowded now. Oh no, +1 -1. So 1 -1. That's over here. And I'm going to label them. 1 -1. Now I need my next point. +2, +3. That must be in quadrant 1 as my quick mental check. Both are positive. So I have 2, 3. My next point. And then -4, -2. It's going to be 4 in this direction and 2 in this direction. Hey, that's at point F. So I'm just going to write down -4, -2. And then I'll need to start drawing my triangle. I'm going to connect them freehand. So I now have a triangle here. I've done the first piece of that. Now let's try drawing triangle number 2 because you're going to have a question on that one. It's at -1, -1, -2, +3, and +4, -2. It looks like each coordinate is the opposite in the x-axis. So I'm thinking that when I draw triangle number 2, it's going to look like this triangle, but probably it'll be like flipped because here are my positive x's and here are my negative x's. So if I go to -1, -1, that'll be down here. If I go to +2, +3, -2, +3, it's going to be up here. And then, taking a shortcut, please label it. So +4, -2, +4, -2 is going to be down here. Now I have to connect them. Labeling them will help you remember where things are. And it will help you connect them. So there's -1, -1 connecting to -2, +3. Connecting to 4, -2. Which connects back over this way. I'm going to shade this one in a little bit darker. Oh, that's interesting. Kind of looks like I drew a star. The triangles are exactly the same size, but they're symmetric around the y-axis. It's just flipped over the y-axis. So I'm going to write, as my answer to number 5, we're going to skip 3 and 4 for now. How is triangle 1 related to triangle 2? Well, the signs of the x-coordinates are opposite. Because of that, the triangles are the same size, but they are reflected, that means flipped over, about. Reflected about means like flipped over. Flipped over the y-axis. So if we change the signs of the x, it'll flip it over y. Now that is my answer to E5. Now, you're going to have more to do with E5 because you have to relate triangle 1 to 3 and triangle 1 to triangle 4, and you should come up with some pretty interesting results. There's a little note at the bottom saying the homework starts on page 32. But for Monday night, our homework is just going to be to get that form signed by your parents. So I hope you enjoyed our quick lunch discussion, and good luck with the rest.